There was a very famous incident called the Battle of the Guay. It occurred while I was in Zimbabwe, where a wounded leopard eventually ended up mauling 7 different professional hunters. 7 guys got mauled by this one leopard. One of the professional hunters actually got shot by the game scout as well. So it was known as the Battle of the Guay, and it has been recorded. Stories have been written about this incident, but it just goes to show you that if you wound a leopard and that leopard is not seriously wounded, someone's going to get hurt at the end of the day.
Hi there, I'm John McAdams, founder of the Big Game Hunting blog. In this video, we are joined by Dr. Kevin Robertson again. Now, Kevin and I talk about leopard hunting in this episode, and like you just heard, those creatures can be extremely dangerous when wounded. In addition to hearing the rest of that story, Kevin is going to talk to us about leopard hunting in detail in this video. We'll talk about things like bait setup, how to evaluate a trophy leopard, cartridge and bullet selection for leopard hunting, shot placement, and how it is different for the cats compared to plains game and buffalo, and what can happen if your shot placement is not good. Just like with our other discussions about hunting Africa, Kevin knows a lot more about this subject than I do, and it really pays to pay attention to what he has to say. Dr. Kevin Robertson is a veterinarian and a licensed professional hunter. He began his veterinary and PH career in Zimbabwe, and he wrote the best-selling book, The Perfect Shot, where he shares his extensive firearm, ballistics, and general hunting knowledge. Now, he has also recently published an updated version of The Perfect Shot titled The Perfect Shot 2. And both of these books are outstanding resources for those planning a hunt in Africa. Go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin to pick up a copy of one of these books for yourself. Okay, now let's get back to our discussion on leopard hunting in Africa with Kevin Robertson.
Well, Kevin, it is great having you back on the show again today. Thank you so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure. Hope your listeners are going to find this interesting.
Well, I certainly hope so. You're one of my most popular guests, and people were asking me when I was going to have you back on the show again, so I'm glad that we were able to make that happen with you today to talk about leopard. So as we get started today, we've started our last few interviews with stories of how you've seen things go sideways for hunters pursuing dangerous game in Africa, and since we're talking about leopard, do you have a similar story that illustrates what can happen when things go wrong with those creatures?
I don't have any personal experience of that because I was 35 years old when I qualified as a fully licensed professional hunter in Zimbabwe. And by that stage in my life, I was happily married with 3 kids, and I had a successful career farming, a veterinary practice, and my safari company. And I was very cautious about hunting leopards because the statistics that we were given when we were being trained as professional hunters was that 81% of all the people that are injured while on safari, that's client, PH, tracker, everybody, 81% of all the people that required hospital attention while hunting dangerous game was as a result of leopards. So leopard is, some people consider them Africa's most dangerous animal from that perspective. My personal view is not many people get killed by leopards, but a lot of people end up being scratched and having their faces modified by leopards. So I was always very cautious about hunting leopards. I loved hunting leopards, but I was actually cautious to the point of being paranoid that I did everything right, so I never got myself into a situation where I would ever have to follow a wounded leopard. And I'm probably rather proud of the fact that after 30 years of professional hunting and many leopards in the salt, I never had to follow a wounded leopard. Every leopard that my client shot was dead under the bay tree. And we're going to talk about shot placement a little bit later on, and how I actually came to find out the perfect shot for a leopard. I'll just relate that story just now, but there was a very famous incident called the Battle of the Guay, and it occurred while I was in Zimbabwe, where a wounded leopard eventually ended up mauling 7 different professional hunters. 7 guys got mauled by this one leopard. One of the professional hunters actually got shot by the game scout as well. So it was known as the Battle of the Guay, and it has been recorded. Stories have been written about this incident, but it just goes to show you that if you wound a leopard and that leopard is not seriously wounded, someone's going to get hurt at the end of the day. And that's what makes leopard hunting so challenging and so interesting, because the shot at a leopard should be the easiest shot on your safari. You're sitting behind a bench rest. Your rifle is sighted in perfectly for the shooting distance. Your animal is exactly side on, less than 100 meters, sometimes 40 or 50 meters away. And it should be the easiest animal to kill. Leopards are easy to kill if you hit them in the right spot with the right caliber and bullet combination. And yet, for some reason, this is the shot that's probably fluffed more in Africa than any other shot. And that is the reputation of a leopard. You know, I've spoken in our previous podcasts about mental preparation and making sure that you are mentally prepared for the occasion. And a leopard is just one of those animals that really tests that theory to the absolute limit. Leopard should be no harder to kill a leopard than it is to kill a whitetail out of a deer blind on a sendero in the South Texas brush country. But yet, people wound leopards, more leopards or get wounded than almost any other game animal. And I think the reason for that, the people are just so surprised to see that spotted feline suddenly appear as if by magic, that their respiration rate goes into overdrive, their adrenaline goes through the roof, and they just fluff the shot. How's that for an introduction?
Yeah, really. That was quite the introduction, especially the story about that one leopard injuring 7 different professional hunters. Can you share some more details of that story for the audience and I?
Okay, the leopard was wounded. So PH and his trackers went in to follow it. He called in a second PH. They followed the wounded leopard. They both got scratched, ended up in hospital. The safari operator called in another 2 PHs to try and find the leopard. They ended up both being scratched. Then they called in another 3 PHs. This was in the Matabele land area, and those 3 PHs all got scratched as well, plus one of them got shot by the game scout. So 7 guys ended up in hospital from one leopard before it was eventually killed. It was just one of those, it's a well-known Zimbabwe story, and it's one of those absolute horror shows. Because if you wound a leopard, someone will get charged at some stage. That's a fait accompli. But let me kick off with my first initial story. When I qualified as a professional hunter, in the days, the Zimbabwe Hunters Association had the Makuti and the Chirara safari areas. And I was a farmer in Guay. Guay was the closest town to the Makuti and Chirara. And those were hunts for for Zimbabwe citizens and Zimbabwe permanent residents. And it was fantastic for me because I started my professional hunting career as an outfitter. And I used to outfit for guys that drew a leopard hunt or a buffalo hunt. And then I would take them to these safari areas. I would outfit them. And it was fantastic for me because my farm was only an hour and a half away, and I used my cook and my mechanics, and I had all the safari equipment. So there was a guy called Paul Clark, and he ran a very successful business called Clark Marine, and he drew a leopard and a buffalo hunt. And I took him to the Makuti safari area, and we were just looking for buffalo one day, driving along the tsetse fly fence, because if you drive from Guay to Makuti, you about halfway along that distance, as you into the foothills of the Zambezi Valley escarpment, there was a tsetse fly control fence where no people or no animals were allowed other side of that fence, which was into what was the start of the Zambezi Valley. And in those days, the tsetse fly control department was trying to eradicate the tsetse fly. And they used to use traps which were baited, and it was quite a successful program. And they had a very intricate road network because they had to get to these traps all over this very rugged piece of Zimbabwe wilderness, which was the Zambezi Valley escarpment. And we were in miles from nowhere driving. We were just actually looking for an old dugger boy, and we came across the road crossed a dry, sandy riverbed, and my tracker pointed, and he said there was a set of leopard tracks heading up towards a little gorge, like a canyon in the mountain. And they were absolutely fresh. So we quickly decided, we abandoned the buffalo hunt and decided to try and hunt this leopard. So we drove around a bit until we found a troop of baboons, and my client, or Paul Clark, shot a baboon, and he was using a 7x64, which is a European caliber, pretty similar in performance to a 7-meter Remington Magnum. And he was using 174 grain bullet. It was a Ciliaton Bellet. It was an unusual design of a bullet. It almost looked like it was a standing bullet, but had a very distinct shoulder on it, almost like a semi-wad cutter. Anyway, we shot this nice big male baboon, and we found the ideal tree overhanging this sandy little riverbed. And we quickly we dragged the guts from the canyon towards the tree. We quickly built a blind, and nothing happened for a couple of days until eventually this baboon started to really putrefy. And by that stage, we'd shot a really nice buffalo. So I thought, when I looked at this fraught baboon, I thought no self-respecting leopard was going to eat a really putrid baboon. So we hung next to the baboon, we hung the full neck of a buffalo. It was probably 100 pounds of delicious, nice, fresh buffalo meat. Anyway, we went into the blind that evening, and we were sitting in the blind, and I noticed that my client was wearing Danner boots. He's very proud of the fact he bought himself from the States a pair of Danner boots, and these boots had a squeak, and every time we walked, the leather was squeaking. So we walked into the blind well before sunset, and we were sat there for a couple of hours, and eventually it got dark, and then eventually it was too dark to shoot, and then we heard the leopard in the tree feeding on something. And in a normal situation like that, you wait an hour once the leopard is fed before you leave the blind. And because his boot was squeaking, I was very worried that the leopard would hear us walking out of the blind. So I made him crawl on his hands and knees for about 200 meters, which he wasn't very pleased about. But we managed to get away, and then we were so far from camp. We were about 3 hours from camp. And I just had a good feeling. You know, a lot of hunting or in leopard situations like that, you just get a gut feeling, or you get an intuition. And I said to him, I've got a feeling that we're going to get this leopard tomorrow morning. Instead of driving 3 hours back to camp, and then we have to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to drive 3 hours back again, why don't we just go and find a place and we'll just fly camp for the night? And we had 2 stretchers, and we had 2 camp chairs, and we had a cooler box with a couple of beers and some meat and stuff. So we just drove a couple of Ks up the road, found a nice place. We made a fire. We put our stretchers next to the vehicle, and we slept there that night. And all we had was my tracker and the Game Scout, and they were quite happy just to sit around a fire all night. And then the next morning, really early, we went back, and because his boot was still squeaking, I made him crawl again into the blind, because the bait was only 40 meters from the blind, which is not far when there's a possibility that there's a sleeping cat close by. Anyway, we got into the blind, and his rifle had a 3 to 9 power scope. And I said to him, just make sure your scope is turned down to 3 power, because anyway, we got into the blind, we got set up, and we were sitting there in the absolute darkness. And then what is one of the most wonderful things about a leopard hunt, is that in those situations, you have to rely on all your senses. So you listen to the sounds of the veld coming to life. And it was just starting to get light. And I was looking through my peephole at the blind, when all of a sudden I saw from exactly below the bait, which was the bank of this little dry riverbed, I just saw a head appear. And the head was so large, I actually thought it was the head of a lioness. And then I was looking through my binoculars, and I've got really nice Swarovski binoculars, which are very good light gathering. And I noticed that this lioness's head had spots on it. And I suddenly realized it was the head of a massive male leopard. You know, those big old male leopards get that really big head and a muscular neck. And they almost get sort of like big, overdeveloped arches over their eyebrows. So I dug old Paul Clark in his thigh with my finger, and I whispered to him, on the ground below the bait. Anyway, his heart rate, I could suddenly hear him breathing like he'd run a marathon, and he was hyperventilating, and he was getting, and he said, I can't see it. I said, find the bait and drop straight down. It's on the ground below the bait. And I can't see it. And eventually this leopard had now heard all this frantic whispering, was now looking straight at the blind. And I was watching it through my binoculars. And suddenly I just heard old poor Clark go next to me like that. What had happened was his scope, in the darkness, it turned his scope to 9 power. And when he eventually found the leopard, all he saw was this big yellow eye looking straight back at him. And I don't know, the lion's eye and a leopard's eye is quite an intimidating thing, especially because they just don't blink. And then they say they look deep into your soul. Anyway, there was some frantic fumbling as he turned his scope down to a lower setting. And the leopard was sitting in what we call the dog sitting position. So he was sitting exactly like a dog was sitting, exactly side on to us, with his head turned to look. He was looking directly at us. And he was only 30 meters away. And the only shot that Paul had, and I said to him, just shoot him straight on the shoulder. Shoot him on the shoulder blade. You could actually see this the leopard's scapula. And he shot that, and he fired, and the leopard just disappeared. So we scrambled out of the blind, and I had my rifle, and we waited for 20 minutes or so till the light was much better, and very cautiously approached the riverbed, and there was this leopard lying absolutely stone dead. And that shot had taken out through his both shoulder blades and had taken out his spine, which lies between the neck of the shoulder the neck of the shoulder blades. It actually killed it absolutely instantly. That leopard just dropped its head down, did not, it twitched, it was absolutely dead. And it was a massive old male, and he was a big fight moon. He'd been fighting another leopard had obviously come to steal his bait, or steal the bait, and he'd had a fight with another leopard, and he was scratched all over, and there was a big scratch on his shoulder where there was a massive fight. But what I found most interesting was that baboon had disappeared. That old leopard had eaten that baboon in its entirety, and this beautiful, nice, fresh piece of buffalo neck was hanging there completely untouched. But why a leopard would eat a frog? I mean, when we were sitting in the blind that evening, we could actually hear the maggots flopping out of the baboon. It was putrid, absolutely putrid. And yet that leopard ate that baboon rather than eating a nice fresh piece of buffalo neck. And that 7mm bullet, that 174 grain bullet, had taken out. It didn't exit. It was actually against the skin on the opposite side. But that bullet is quite a fragile bullet, and it had obviously just almost exploded like a hand grenade, and that killed that leopard absolutely instantly. So from then onwards, every other leopard that we shot, or I hunted, or my client shot, we used that same shot. It's called the high shoulder spinal shot, through the scapulars and the spinal cord, and every leopard has been dead underneath the bay tree. Everyone has just fallen out of the tree, dead at the bottom. So when it comes to following wounded leopards and that, I have no experience, and I have no intention of ever following a wounded leopard, because at some stage, if you follow a wounded leopard, you will get charged. And out of my professional hunter friends, I can count on my fingers and my toes guys that I know that have been mauled by leopards. And all of them, everybody thinks you shoot a leopard just behind the shoulder. The truth be told, a leopard's heart is a lot further back than many people realize. And I've went to great lengths in my book, The Perfect Shot 1 and The Perfect Shot 2, to explain where the leopard's heart is. Because a lot of people, if you shoot it just behind the shoulder, I think that's actually quite a tricky shot, because the sternum rises upwards, and as the spine starts to dip down into the neck and the shoulder region, that little area, it forms a sort of a triangle, and that shot just behind the shoulder is into a very small part of the very front of the lungs. It's not a very effective shot at all. A lot of people think that if you shoot where you should shoot a leopard, it almost looks like you should shoot it in the abdomen, but its leopard's heart is quite far back. I would say at least the majority, 75%, maybe even more, of leopards are shot at absolutely last light. So in the areas that I hunted, which were safari areas, that was illegal to hunt half an hour before sunrise to half an hour after sunset. And it was illegal to use any form of artificial light. So you had to make your bait and your whole situation so attractive that leopard would do something which he didn't do. And that's show himself at a reasonable shooting distance and under natural daylight conditions. Then if he does that, and you take what is probably everybody goes for the heart-lung shot, that leopard invariably runs off. And if he's wounded, he'll run off grunting. If he runs off silently, then you've missed. And then you've got to go and find that leopard. By that stage, it's total darkness. And to go and look for a leopard in the dark with a flashlight is the only time many PHs seriously consider their choice of occupation, because that is not a nice thing to do, and the chances of being scratched are very good. If you then leave that leopard if it's too dangerous to find that leopard at night, and you leave it to go and come back in the morning, which is probably the sensible thing to do, many times you find that your hard-earned trophy has been eaten by hyenas, or sometimes even eaten by other leopards. So I never had that situation. I just taught my clients where the shot was, and we just shoot them through the shoulder blades, and the leopard would be dead under the tree. You could see him from the bait, from the blind. You could normally see him just lying there. Give it a couple of minutes, just make sure he's dead, then just walk up and pick him up. So that was my that's an introduction to leopard hunting for you. How did that sound?
Well, that was all very, very interesting. And I remember reading about that story in The Perfect Shot about your client with the squeaky boots that had his scope turned all the way up to 9 power, etc. So it was really cool to hear you tell that story in a little bit more detail today. Now, what percentage of leopards would you say are shot very late in the afternoon or evening compared to first thing in the morning, as was the case with this particular hunter?
I would say 75%, 25%, something like that. What has changed a lot, in the days when I hunted leopards, there were no trail cameras, and nowadays you can see what time the leopard's coming in to feed, and you can sex the leopard and look for testicles and things like that. In our day, my time, you didn't have that. You just had to be so fastidious in your preparation, and you had to make it so attractive for the leopard that invariably they would come in just before last light. And that was a magical time, because your listeners need to understand what a magical experience blind sitting is. A lot of people say, God, it must be boring just sitting absolutely dead still without even moving for hours on end. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, because it's the time when you really tested your senses. And how often in life do we ever just really sit and just listen to nature, or just listen to the world around us? And you'd hear the birds calling, the doves, and then if you're near your bait is near some form of water, the doves will fly in the evening, and there might even be sandgrouse. And then you start here, as the day starts to end, then you hear the other birds start to call, and there's an absolute change. And then all of a sudden you'll hear a baboon will bark, or a monkey will chatter, or a francolin will give you a warning squawk. And you are peering intensely at your bait, and nothing happens. And you look away momentarily, and you look back again, and as if by magic, there's this most beautiful spotted cat sitting in the bait tree, just as if a magic wand had placed it there. It's a absolutely amazing experience, and I experienced that many times, and each one of those experiences was as wonderful as the previous one. Just truly amazing.
In your book, The Perfect Shot, you say that you hunt an elephant with your legs, a buffalo with your guts, and a lion with your heart. If that is so, then you hunt a leopard with your brain. So with all that stuff in mind, and taking that into account, as well as the stories you've told so far, it sounds like that as a professional hunter that's hunting leopard, you really make your money in getting all of the details right, getting everything set up exactly perfect, and that the process of doing this, dotting every I, crossing every T, is really 95% of all of the effort and energy that is involved in a successful leopard hunt.
You've got to do 110 things 110% correct. That's the challenge when it comes. Because the biggest problem with leopard hunting is that you've got to get into your blind and get out of your blind without the leopard seeing you from the bait, or from seeing you. Because when people, we know you wanted to talk about hounds, and when people have put up a bait and then used the bait to attract a leopard and then hunted that leopard with hounds, that leopard is always within half a mile of the bait. He never goes very far. And leopards, they will feed and then they'll go to a rocky outcrop for sleep, but they also just like to get out in places and just to look around. So the challenge with leopard hunting is, first of all, is to find the right leopard. And leopards are lazy creatures, so they like to walk on dirt roads and they like to walk on sandy riverbeds because that's easy. They don't like to get wet, so if there's dew on the grass, they'll prefer to walk on a road where there's no grass and that type of thing. And then we were taught, so maybe I mentioned at this point in time, if people, one of your listeners are seriously interested in hunting a leopard, they've obviously got to read The Perfect Shot, but there are two other books which I believe are absolutely essential in your education on leopards. And the first book is a book called Into the Thorns by a PH called Wayne Grant. And Wayne Grant, he hunted in Matabele land, and he made a successful business out of hunting the leopards in the Matopo Hills. These are these massive big leopards that are in the cattle ranching areas that are super clever. You cannot believe how smart and secretive they are, but he managed to figure out how to hunt these leopards. And he wrote a book about that called Into the Thorns, and that is an absolutely essential book for anybody that's interested in hunting a leopard to read that book. The other book is a book called Chui, that's Chui, by a guy called Clive Hallimore. And Clive Hallimore, he was probably the guru, the dean of leopard hunting in Zimbabwe. He very successful, and he could hunt. And everybody else gave up on a leopard. They said, this leopard's impossible to hunt. Or Clive would go in there and he'd have that thing and assault in no time at all. So those two books are very leopard-specific books. But in his book, Wayne Grant described a method that we eventually became to use. So every time we would find a leopard track, you'd find a really nice, clear print of one of the front legs. So the front paw prints are more rounded than the hind legs, which are slightly more oval. And we would cut a stick to the length of the vertical diameter of that print. And if that print is about 4 inches, about the length of a cigarette, normal filter cigarette, that was the indication there was a good leopard. And then on that same stick, once you've cut that stick to that length, then you would mark on the stick the greatest horizontal diameter. That was the distance between the outside toes. And that's always slightly smaller than the vertical length. And you just with your knife, you just cut a little ridge where that was. And then we'd also use that same stick to measure the width of the back pad. And if the back pad of a big leopard is 2.5 inches or more, you've got a seriously big cat. And if you add those three measurements up, if it comes to 10 inches or more, then you've got what we call a super cat. That's a cat that's just and what I used to do is then you take that stick and you'd mark it with a 1 or a 2, and then you carry those sticks in your pocket. And every time on a normal leopard hunt, we would get 5, sometimes even 6 different males feeding. And then obviously, and we would cut a stick for every male that we found feeding. And then all you had to do is compare the dimensions of each stick that you cut. And obviously you'd go and sit for the biggest male. And that was a very successful way of almost trophy assessment. I see one of your questions is, how do you trophy assess a cat? Well, trophy assessment of a cat starts with the measurement of his front pad. And you've got to do it. You can't do it in soft sand. You've got to have to find the right track. When I was at the South African Wildlife College, I think I've mentioned I was there for 5 years as one of the departmental heads. And we trained professional hunters, and we taught leopard hunting to PH students and to members of the South African Hunters Association. And there was a leopard in our area that this leopard killed 3 lone territorial wildebeest bulls. That's a leopard killing a big wildebeest bull. I mean, and that leopard, I've got some photographs of that leopard. He was an absolute monster. We estimated he weighed 90 kilos, which would be about 190 pounds. And his track was 10 inches and 5/8. I mean, he was just a monster of a leopard. There was also a leopard in the Kaseri, which this leopard specialized in killing male giraffe. And the giraffe used to go and lie on the airstrip of one of the game reserves. And this leopard, he would just lie there ruminating. And this leopard would then stalk him from behind and jump on his back and get hold of his throat. And I would never have thought it possible, but that leopard actually killed a fully grown giraffe. So the leopards are amazingly powerful, strong animals.
Now, to give the listener an appreciation for just what you're talking about and how impressive this is with a leopard that's killing wildebeest and giraffe, they normally eat things like impala, duiker, that are much smaller animals, right?
Yeah, warthogs, baboons, guinea fowl. But I've got photographs in my photographic collection. I've got a photograph of a baby giraffe in a tree. Now, a baby giraffe is born at 6 foot tall and probably weighs at least 250 pounds when it's born. But I've got a picture of a giraffe in a tree, and I've got a picture of a young zebra in a tree as well. And it was taken there by a leopard. So a leopard could probably, if a leopard weighs 180 pounds, he can probably lift up 3 times his body weight, carry 3 times his body weight. So they are immensely powerful animals.
So sorry for interrupting you like that. I just wanted to impress upon the listener what an incredible feat that is to have a leopard killing a lone wildebeest, bull, or even a giraffe like that is so different from the things that a leopard is normally killing and eating.
And I think the reason for that leopard was that he was just an absolute monster. And eventually, I was there for 5 years and managed to get photographs of him. And eventually, he started losing his teeth, and then he started to decline. He was past his prime. But it's quite interesting if you talk about leopards. In the Kruger National Park, more people have been killed by leopards in the last 5 years than in the last 100 years. And it's a very interesting situation because every leopard eventually gets killed by a lion. And I've found lion scat that contains leopard claws. But what is happening now in the Kruger National Park, they've got tuberculosis in the buffalo, and the lions that eat the buffalo then eventually get tuberculosis. So the lions are not getting to old age anymore, and eventually an old lion will eventually kill an old leopard. But if there are no old lions, the leopards that would normally be taken out by lions are now surviving, and they've got nowhere to go because everywhere they go, they're in another leopard's territory. So I was very good friends with the local game ranger, and he phoned me one day to say there was a camp called Talamati, which is near Auckland Gate, which is for caravans and campers only. And this dear old Afrikaans lady went into the ladies' ablution block the first thing at first light one morning, and she confronted a big male leopard in the ladies' toilet.
Oh my goodness, I bet that was quite the surprise.
What had actually happened, these leopards, because the camps, there are always monkeys and baboons and francolin and rats and sometimes duiker and bushbuck in the camps. These leopards take up residence in the camp, and they live there undetected, but they survive there because no other leopards, they've sort of protected. So my game ranger friend asked me, he said, what the hell are we going to do? So I said, no, geez, you can't have a bloody leopard in the camp. So my suggestion was that he went and shot an impala, and he dragged it around the camp, and then he hung it in the furthest corner of the camp on the fence, and he camouflaged his pickup truck, and he just waited until everybody went to sleep. And within 5 minutes of the last lights being extinguished in the caravan park, that leopard was eating this impala. And that's again, I said to him, listen, you can't have a wounded leopard running around a camp, so you just make sure you're shooting with the shoulder spinal shot. When I explained to him in detail where it was, how to do it, and he just used a 3006 and 180 grain, just a PMP, just a regular old Pro-Am PMP, and shot that leopard through the shoulder blades, and that leopard just dropped its head and died instantly. So, I mean, leopards are absolutely amazing creatures. Another story, when I was a veterinary student in Pretoria, which is a big city in South Africa, the adjacent city is Johannesburg. And in Johannesburg is the Wanderers Cricket Club. It's a Wanderers Stadium. It's where international cricket matches are played. And I remember very clearly on a Sunday there was an international cricket match, and the following Monday the janitors were going around cleaning the stadium from all the litter that was left behind, and one of them heard some meowing underneath one of the chairs, and he lifted up the chair, and there were 2 leopard cubs in the stadium.
Oh, wow.
So they notified the authorities, and the female was quickly trapped because she obviously came back for her cubs. But they never found the male. I mean, obviously, if she had cubs, there must be a male around somewhere, and no male was ever found. And then just recently on the highway between Irene and Pretoria, which is on one of the main highways, a leopard was killed, or it was a roadkill. A leopard ran across the road and was hit by a motor car. So in the big cities like Johannesburg, who would ever think that there would be leopards floating around? Oh, they're quite amazing animals. They can live in amongst habitation, and you never know they're there. Everybody wonders why their fluffy little Pekingese poodle disappeared off the veranda or the porch of their house. Their cats disappear. Well, that's leopards are taking that. So even in modern day Africa, there are leopards in relatively highly dense populated areas.
I have heard very similar stories to that about mountain lions that live in very urban areas in different parts of the United States. And it is amazing to me that such a relatively large creature like that is just still so shy and reclusive that they can be living literally right next to people and no one really knows they're there until someone takes a picture of one on a security camera or something like that, or someone's dog or cat disappears.
When I was the veterinarian in Karoi, which was the last town before Lake Kariba, Lake Kariba in the good old Zimbabwe days was a very popular retirement place for old age pensioners. And on Sunday nights, there used to be a soccer program. And it was just getting dark one Sunday when my phone rang. It was an old couple that lived in Kariba Heights. They phoned to say that a leopard had just come into their house and had taken their Alsatian, their German Shepherd dog. And what had actually happened, the old guy was sitting in his lounge watching TV, and he had his feet up on the coffee table, and his dog was lying underneath his legs. And this house had a fly screen door which opened inwards. And him and his wife were sitting next to each other, and they heard the fly screen door bang shut. And next minute, this spotted blur came into their sitting room and grabbed the Alsatian, which was actually underneath his legs. And the dog just gave one yelp and then just disappeared. But by now, the fly screen door had swung closed. So the leopard took the dog and himself. He just burst through the fly screen. It was just mosquito netting. And the old cook was standing in the driveway smoking a cigarette, and he heard the door bang, he heard the yelp, and he looked around, and down the driveway came this leopard with the Alsatian in its mouth. And he happened to glance down, and there happened to be half a brick lying at his feet. And he picked up the brick, and as the leopard jumped over the gate, he let the leopard have it, and luckily they hit the leopard on the head with this half a brick, and the leopard just dropped the dog and just disappeared. So there was this poor Alsatian with these big bite wounds all over his head and neck, and I was an hour and a half away. They brought him to me, and I eventually managed to save the life of the dog from that morning.
Okay, so let's rewind a little bit and go back to the good old days when you were a professional hunter in Zimbabwe. Let's pretend that you have a client coming in that wants to hunt leopard. Take us step by step, starting at the beginning, what you would do to set this guy up for success and put him on a leopard.
Okay, so he's going to hunt a leopard with something else as well, because people normally put leopard and buffalo go together very well, because a buffalo hunt, you have to drive a lot looking for tracks. And while you're driving, looking for tracks, and while you're walking, tracking buffalo, what your tracker's also doing is also looking for leopard sign. And every time you saw a leopard, no matter where you were, you would stop and you would cut a stick, as I explained, to determine the size. And if it was a female leopard, you didn't bother with it. And then you started looking for suitable bait sites. So invariably, on every hunt that I did, you'd have a buffalo, leopard, you'd have 5 or 6 impala. And impala are probably leopard's most favored prey animals because they're so numerous. So it makes absolute sense to use the animals that they'd like to eat the most. So then you'd shoot a couple impala, and then you'd start driving around. Once you've identified where your leopards are walking, you've found their tracks. Leopards are territorial, and a female leopard will have her own territory, and they live individually. And then the males have territories as well, and those territories interact with the female's territory. So and if you spend enough time on a hunt looking around, and the nice thing about carrying these little sticks that I'll describe, you'd drive along and you'd see a leopard track, and you could then match that track to one of the sticks you're carrying in your pocket. So now this is leopard number 1 or leopard number 2, till eventually you'd sort of almost figured out where that leopard's territory was. And the leopard hunt, some people say a leopard hunt's amazingly boring because all you do, you spend your life driving and checking baits. So once you've identified where a leopard is, and normally a very good place would be close to water where the leopard has to come to drink, or water hole, because that's where his prey species have to come up to drink. So it makes obvious you'd find a place where there's lots of prey animals. If you find leopard tracks there, then you'd find a suitable place to build a blind, because the blind was actually more important than your bait tree. And once you found a place where you could get into and get out without being seen, then you would select a tree in which to hang the bait. And if it wasn't the perfect tree, we used to construct ladders for the leopards. So you just make sure the bait was high enough off the ground that the hyenas couldn't get it and the lions couldn't climb the tree to get it. So the leopards had to be in a tree. And then if there wasn't an easy access to that tree, you would actually lean a pole against it. Because theoretically, you wanted to get your position where your blind was, you wanted to get your leopard exactly side on. And that's the ideal situation. But the tree that you choose for a leopard blind is very different, for a leopard bait, is very different from a tree you choose for a lion or for a hyena bait, because leopards don't like to expose themselves. So you want a tree that's got thick cover around it so the leopard can get into the tree without being seen. And as I explained earlier, sometimes you'd hear the warning calls of a francolin or a guinea fowl or a monkey, and you wouldn't see anything, and the next minute the leopard would be in the tree. So he wants to be able to approach that tree without being detected. The tree you would use for a lion or for a hyena would be in a lone tree in an exposed area, because lions are bold and they don't worry about having cover to approach. Then you want to be able to, because you'll shoot the lion around the tree. Leopard, you're always going to shoot him in the tree. Very rarely do you shoot him on the ground below the tree, because it's just too dense foliage. So once you found your right tree, you found your right place to build the blind. You build the blind, and with modern day now, you've got rangefinders that even determine the angles. You would measure the blind to the bait distance exactly, get the angle right, and then you'd go and sight your client's rifle into that exact shooting distance, because you've got to have your rifle dead on. And we also then drag, and we also used to drag. Often the ideal situation would be where a road crossed a dry riverbed. You would always drag towards the bait in 4 different directions, so that leopards can smell fairly well, and then they would just follow that scent line to the bait. And it was very important that the guy that climbed into the tree, you had to hide all your human scent. So he would take a bucket of ingesta or guts up, and then as he's climbing out of the tree, he would just, everywhere he's touched, he would just smear gut content to hide his own smell. Then you put up your baits, and if you've got cameras, you put your cameras so that, and then you have to go and check them. And that's where the driving takes place. And you check a bait, and then you find your bait's been hit, then you check your cameras. We didn't do that because we didn't have cameras. So what we would do, we would have an area where we would sweep the ground very carefully so that we could get a good print of the animal, that got into the tree. And also you can see by the size of the claws marks that they use when they climb up the trunk of the tree, basically you can get an idea how big the spread of the claws are, which gives you a really good idea how big the leopard is. And then you decide which one you're going to go for. Then you just take your chance and go and sit in the evening, and the leopard doesn't come, you go back the next morning, and you just sit until eventually sometimes you have to replace the baits, and then sometimes you get lucky. And I never was unsuccessful in not securing a leopard. Every leopard hunt that I went on, we eventually shot a leopard. But the big thing is getting the right situation. There was a tree in the Zambezi Valley, in the Nyakasanga Safari area. So those hunts were what we called auction hunts, where the packages were put on an auction system, so various PHs could bid on those packages. And there was a tree there that, out of that one tree, I know of 7 leopards were shot out of that same tree. It was just the perfect tree. It was on a dry riverbed going towards the Zambezi River. There was just lots of impala. There was near a little pan. It was the ideal thing. There was an anthill which people used to put their blinds on. And then the time that I was here, that tree produced 7 male leopards over a number of years. It was just an absolutely ideal situation. So leopards are territorial. So if you've got in the prime spot where the most of the game is and where the water is, the most dominant leopard will obviously fight for that privilege to own that territory. If that leopard gets shot, and they sometimes do, those territories are taken over within a couple of days. There's another leopard will move in, he gets an opportunity to take over that. And if he gets shot, well, then another leopard moves in. I mean, the leopards are, I think people don't realize how, you never see leopards, so you don't realize how many there really are. You just don't really see them. Does that sort of cover that question?
Yes, definitely. And to expound on that a little bit, what sort of distance from a road are you trying to set your blinds up? So how far are you having to walk from the road to get to your blind? And at the same time, what is your ideal shot distance? So how close to the bait are you trying to set up your blinds?
We would normally park a car at least a kilometer, maybe a mile or maybe half a mile away, because obviously they want to hear that you coming driving at night. So the leopard's going to see lights and is going to hear a vehicle. So, and then walk in, and we used to be absolutely paranoid about, we used to take a hoe and we used to actually hoe a path so it was actually bare and actually sweep it so it was bare earth to get into and then at night mark it with toilet tissue so you can see where you're going. But the setup of the blind, it always was good to have a natural obstacle between the blind and the bait. So that natural obstacle would obviously be a dry riverbed. It could be erosion gully, some obstacle illusion, which created the feeling that it was actually further than it really was. And then, shooting distances, some as close as 30 meters, absolute maximum 100 meters, depending on the shooting ability of your client and also just the terrain. There was no real set distance. And every bait blind situation was different, just to taking into consideration the terrain involved at that particular time.
Now, of course, I assume a lot of this is dictated by the prevailing terrain that you're hunting in, and at the same time, I'm sure you're trying to make that shot distance as close as possible, just to do everything possible to make things easier on your hunter, when they make that shot, because the last thing that you want is a wounded leopard.
Guys actually even bow hunt leopards, and bow hunting leopard, 25 meters is a long shot, so it is possible to get really close. And imagine with bow hunting, you've got lots more movement. But the leopards have 10-power binocular vision. So when you're looking at your leopard through your 10-power binoculars, he's looking at you with exactly the same magnification in his eyes. And I've been sitting in a blind that's probably 18 inches thick and deep through a hole where you can just barely put your fist, and that hole has got a piece of burlap that closes it. And I've opened that hole carefully, and I moved my head slowly, so I look with one eye through this hole at a feeding leopard that was 50 meters away, and that leopard turned around and he saw me and he looked straight into my eye. I mean, the eyesight is absolutely incredible. So you've got to have that the blind has got to be so well camouflaged and so well. And we even used to go to the stand where I used to wrap, but obviously the barrel of the rifle sticks out through the front of the blind. So I used to actually even wrap burlap around the barrel of my client's rifle so that there was no shine, and just make it as naturally and as thick as possible, because those animals' eyesight is just incredible, absolutely incredible.
So when you're actually setting up the bait, are you trying to make it appear to the leopard that you're going after that some other leopard has killed an impala or whatever and stashed it in the tree, and this leopard has just happened to get lucky and stumble upon it?
Obviously, he knows he didn't put it there himself, but the way you hang your bait is very important, because the leopard needs to be distracted while he's feeding. So what we used to do is you find a suitable branch, and the bait is hung below the branch. So a leopard he'll reach down and he'll grab with his one paw, he'll stick his claws into the bait, and he'll try and lift it up onto the branch so he can feed. But then they're very cautious when they feed. So as soon as he lets go, it swings back underneath the branch again. So he's distracted. You've got to make him want to eat the bait, but it's got to make it difficult for him to eat, if that makes any sense. So he's distracted. He obviously wants to feed, but you're not just tying a big lump of meat onto the top of a branch where he can just lie on the branch and feed. You want him to have to reach down and grab it and lift it up and let it fall down again. So he's physically distracted while he's trying to feed, and that makes him not quite as aware of his surrounding as he would be if the piece of meat was just tied straight onto the top of the branch.
Okay, so you've done all the prep work at this point. You've got a great blind and bait site set up. We've got a leopard coming in, and the bait is set up in such a way that the leopard is really having to work to get it, so he's very distracted and focused on that, and he's as close to broadside as you can get. So now what? Well, what happens next?
All right, so all of a sudden, there's the leopard in the tree, and then your client's heart rate goes through the roof. He starts hyperventilating, and the time is just say, take your time, slow down. But your job as the PH is to calm him down, not let him rush the shot, and also then to identify that's the right leopard. So the difference between a male and a female leopard, with a bit of practice, is very easy to determine. A big male leopard, he's got this big head, almost the size of a lioness, thick neck, heavy shoulders. And a leopard that's 7 years or older has a very distinct dewlap, like a little flap of skin that goes from the bottom of his jaw down to almost to his brisket, to his sternum. If that leopard, that's your 7-year-old leopard, that's your trophy leopard. A young male leopard and a female leopard, a young male leopard and a mature female leopard can look very similar. And with the way things are going at the moment, you're not allowed to shoot female leopards. So if you've got to be absolutely sure. If you're absolutely not 100% sure, you've got to try and look for those two testicles that sit like two plums underneath his tail. But I've looked at so many leopards in my life. I could easily identify when you see that big male leopard, there's absolutely no doubt in your mind that it's a big mature male. If you are unsure of the sex at any time, then you just don't take that shot. You've got to wait for him to turn around, because sometimes the leopards will actually turn around on the tree, and you're looking through your binoculars. And I mentioned we were talking about buffalo hunting, how important a good pair of binoculars are. And with leopard hunting, for the professional hunter, it's absolutely essential. So the client doesn't need binoculars for that, because he's losing his scope and a 3 to 9 power scope is absolutely adequate for that. But you've got to be absolutely sure that you're shooting at the right cat, because it's quite often you get males and female leopard in the same tree. And I had an incident where a friend of mine, he was the PH, and he came down with the flu, and he was coughing and he had real flu, and so he said to the client and the game scout, well, you just go into the blind, because I can't sit quietly, I'm just coughing too much. And the client and the PH was sitting in the client and the game scout was sitting in the blind, and sure enough, the leopard came into the tree, and the game scout said, oh yeah, it's a big male, you can take the shot. And he shot, and the leopard fell out of the tree and ran away. And my PH friend was coughing at the time and didn't hear the shot. So he didn't, because he told them, listen, when I hear the shot, I'll just come in. Anyway, so they sat there, nothing happened until eventually there was another leopard in the tree. And the game scout said, you must have missed him, excuse me, with the first shot. You better shoot him again with this. So the client took a shot at the second leopard, and this shot my friend with the flu heard, and he drove in and he walked into the blind and he said, what happened? He said, no, the leopard came in the tree. I took a shot and it just ran off, and you didn't come. And then next minute the leopard came back into the tree, so I shot it, and here it is there. Because the second shot, the leopard, excuse me, leopard fell out of the tree, hit it in the spine. So just out of curiosity, my friend followed the direction. He said, which direction did the first leopard run? And said it ran off in this direction. So he followed the tracks, and sure enough, there was the first leopard. The guy shot 2 leopards within about 5 minutes.
My goodness. Geez, what a mess.
Yeah, that was just an unusual situation. You can imagine there was all sorts of hell to pay. My friend got into all sorts of trouble because he let the game scout make the final decision and things like that. But that's hunting, things like that happen. But that's just an indication that just because you've got a bait in a tree and a leopard comes in, you've got to make sure, the PH has got to make absolutely sure that it's the right leopard before he allows the client to take the shot. And then it's just take the shot. Okay, you can shoot. Make sure you shoot him on the shoulder, and then hopefully the cat falls out the tree. Many times it just runs away grunting. And if a leopard runs away after the shot, runs away grunting, then you know it's been wounded. And the PH then has to try and get a bearing on the direction of the grunts and how far that they last for. Because the leopard will just run to the closest thick cover, and that's where he'll hold up. If it runs away silently, then the client is missed. And it is certainly not uncommon for guys to miss a leopard at 40 meters. They just get so buck fevered up that they just can't handle it.
So I'm looking at your shot placement diagrams in the perfect shot right now, and exactly like you said, things are a little bit different with leopard, and their vitals are located farther back than they are on many other animals. And we'll get into cartridge and bullet selection for leopard here in a second, but it seems like with both shot placement and your cartridge and bullet selection that is ideal for leopard, what's ideal for them is almost completely opposite for what is ideal for a lot of other species of game in Africa, especially Cape buffalo.
Oh, for sure. So a lot of guys come in a buffalo hunt and all they bring is center gain Barnes X's or bear claws or Swift A-frames. And you can kill a leopard with one of those, but that's definitely not the ideal choice. Leopards, all the cat family have a highly refined nervous system. You take any domestic cat and you hold it on its back and you throw it up in the air, that cat will always land on its feet. You do that to a dog, that dog will land on his back. So cats they just wired differently. And you can switch off that central nervous system with a healthy dose of hydrodynamic energy. So the perfect bullet for a leopard is a bullet that gets into the thoracic cavity and then just basically disintegrates. There was a time when PMP, the South African ammo manufacturer, used to sell 300 grain round nose soft point ammunition. It came in a brown box and it had a picture of a rather pathetic immature buffalo on the box. Those bullets were totally unsuitable for buffalo, and they haven't helped anybody that ever used one on buffalo. But those bullets were almost ideal leopard bullets, because we used to use those bullets to shoot impala, and that bullet couldn't shoot through an impala. So it used to get inside the animal, and the brass jacket of it used to open up, looked like a little octopus, and all the lead used to come out and disintegrate. And that was exactly the type of bullet that you need for a leopard. You need a bullet that expands quickly and releases all its hydrodynamic energy. If you're going to shoot it in the thoracic cavity, that energy released into the thoracic cavity is enough. You dump 4,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy into the thoracic cavity of a leopard, it'll just switch off its nervous system. I never tested that theory because I was absolutely sold on the shoulder spinal shot, and I don't regret that. But I have seen pictures of a lot of guys shooting a leopard into the heart lung area, and that leopard just falling out the tree, absolutely stone dead. But that was with the right bullet. If you used a Barnes X or one of the better bullets, that bullet's whipped through before it's had any time to expand and release its inherent energy. But the majority of guys that come on safaris, if you're going to do a buffalo leopard hunt, the logical cartridge to use is a 375 or a 375 Ruger. But you've got to have the right bullet. So when North Fork was still based in Oregon, I got to know the guys that own North Fork, France Java and John, quite well. And I said to them, we need to develop a feline-specific bullet. So what they did, they took their 300 grain regular North Fork soft point. It was a bonded core soft point, very similar to a trophy bonded bear claw. And they milled in what they call the expansion initiating ring. These guys were both mechanical engineers, and their understanding of bullet dynamics and performance was incredible. So we tested these bullets, and the regular 300 grain soft point from a 375 would be fully expanded within 6 inches of penetration when shot into ballistic gel. But with this expansion initiating ring that they developed for the PP, they called it, that bullet would be expanded within 2 inches of penetration. And I went with a friend of mine, Monty Calagueras, who went to the Zambezi Valley, and he used that bullet to hunt a very nice big leopard. And I got the opportunity to dissect that leopard in detail. And what they said how they said the bullet would perform was exactly. So the leopard was skinned, and you could see the shot placement just behind the shoulder. I took the front leg off, and you could see a massive amount of hemorrhage or bruising, and the hole into the thoracic cavity, the hole that was going through the chest wall, was at least 2 inches in diameter, which told me that that bullet had fully expanded by the time it had passed into the chest cavity. But being a bonded bullet with that weight, of course, it came out the other side, but it left an exit hole equally as big, a 2-inch diameter exit hole, and that leopard didn't. It was shot through the front of the heart, but that leopard didn't go 30 meters. So it was a massive wound channel. That was perfect because if push came to shove, you could probably use that leopard. Those bullets to. I know Monty shot a hippo with that same bullet. Shot a hippo with a brain shot, and that worked perfectly. And I really like that bullet. They call it the PP for percussion point. If you excuse it, we called it the pussy pounder because we thought those were just the ideal bullets for the felines.
So it would probably do a heck of a number on a lion then too, wouldn't it?
It would. Another bullet I think works really well for leopard is the nozzle partition. Nozzle partition, the frontal core of the nozzle partition is not bonded. So invariably when that thing expands, it loses its frontal core, and that means it loses 30% of its weight. But it expands quite quickly, and I have seen leopard shot with nozzle partitions, and they seem to really work well. Accubond, nozzle Accubond. So if I was going to shoot a leopard with a 375, what I would do, I would go to a lighter bullet weight, go to a 260 grain bullet, maybe even a 250 grain bullet, and then whip the velocity up a bit. And you use a fairly fragile bullet that's going to expand pretty quickly. But leopards are easy to kill. That's all about shot placement. It's just putting that bullet in the right spot. But you don't want to use your premium buffalo bullet on a leopard. I just believe that's not the right way to go about it. You want a bullet that's going to expand more rapidly and release more energy more quickly. Having said that, if you shot a leopard in exactly the right spot with a 300 grain Swift A-frame, it's probably going to work just fine. But it's probably in the ideal world, there are better options for that.
Well, so you just mentioned shot placement. Can you describe what you consider to be ideal shot placement on a leopard in a little bit more detail for us, please?
Okay, so I believe it's essential to be able to recognize the elbow joint, the point of the shoulder, and to be able to recognize the shoulder blade, the scapula. And when we described the vital triangle, it was the bottom of the scapula, the point of the shoulder, and the point of the elbow. That forms the triangle. Now what we're doing, we're actually shooting the animal through the shoulder blade. So once you've identified the elbow joint, and you can then see the knob of the shoulder joint, then you would go slightly above that and slightly rearwards. So you basically, the scapula is almost shaped like a table tennis bat. And you want to shoot it just where the handle joins the blade of the bat, where it goes from the neck into the blade itself. That is because the spine of a leopard lies exactly underneath that. And the reason that you want to use a quick expanding bullet is that if you hit the shoulder blade then slaps up against the spinal cord. And then I believe it slaps up so hard that it actually severs the spinal cord. But also the bullet passing through the spinal cord in the shoulder region, it's exactly the same as just switching off a light. It just cuts all the brain messages from the brain, just get taken out. That animal drops to the ground. It's killed instantly, and by the time it hits the ground, it's dead. If you're going to shoot a leopard through the heart, and you use a bullet that is not basically explosive, you basically damage the heart, you damage the pump. The lungs will obviously get air into them, so the lungs will collapse. But there's enough oxygen in the brain for that leopard to run for a couple of seconds. And the leopard can run a fairly long distance in a couple of 3 to 5 seconds. Even if that leopard dies, it's run 30, 50, maybe even 60 to 70 meters before it actually expires. And that is very much dependent on what part of the lungs or the heart the bullet hit and how big it expanded and how much internal damage was done. But then the downside of that is by the time, as I mentioned, most leopards are shot at very last light. By the time the vehicle comes up and you've got the trackers all get prepared and they put on their jackets and someone finds the spotlight and someone's carrying a battery with a spotlight, everyone's got torches. By then it's absolutely total darkness. And then you have to try and track in the dark and to try and find that leopard in the dark, which is, I've never done it, but my friends tell me, man, it's not a nice experience. If you had to take that shot in the daylight, if you wanted to take a heart or lung shot at a leopard in daylight, if it's an early morning shot, you've got then the whole day to go and find that leopard. That's not a problem. But you have to realize that in most of these areas, there are certainly other leopards and there are certainly hyenas in these areas, because hyenas also smell these baits. And if you don't find your leopard before at that time, if you leave it for the night, then you basically lost your trophy because something else is going to find it and eat it. And that's just such a waste. So that is one of the challenges of leopard hunting is you're going to have to shoot it at very last light, but then you're going to have to recover it as well if you don't do it properly.
You know, it's very interesting. I'm looking at these shot placement diagrams right now, and especially for this high shoulder shot, if you would have just taken me, not knowing anything, and showed me a picture of a leopard and said, John, okay, where you think the best place is to shoot this leopard, it would be nowhere near where you have recommended shooting for that high shoulder shot. So it's definitely one of these cases where it really pays to do your research ahead of time.
For sure. It's quite interesting. I'm good friends with Jerome, the guy that was the head of Bernie Caron, and he went to hunt a leopard. I'm not a lion, and we were discussing, and he said, where shall I shoot a lion? So I said, no, if you can see the shoulder blade, shoot it through the shoulder blade. And he contacted me afterwards, and he said he could not believe it. He would never have thought to shoot it there, and he shot at a really nice lion. And he shot it, and then he said the shot in the lion just took one step forward and just fell down and died instantly. So it's a very effective shot if you know how to pull it off. And I've pulled it off numerous times. And as I said, every leopard that I've shot had to be underneath a bay tree. There was one unusual incident where I had a South African client, and we had been on a buffalo hunt, and we'd gone and fly camped right up at the base of the escarpment. We were hunting in Nyakasanga as well. And it was one of those disasters. We towed a trailer because we had a bit of camping equipment, and then the axle of the trailer broke, and then our can with water in it split, so we had no water. And we were driving back to camp, and after 2 really frustrating days, and there was a little guasha, a little ravine we had to cross to get to camp. And our camp was only about a kilometer away, and as we crossed this ravine, my tracker said to me, oh, look, there's really fresh leopard tracks going down to the river, because this is the river road that runs parallel to the Zambezi River. And we'd had, by chance, had shot an impala for the labor that on our way back to camp. So I looked down, we could just see that the leopard tracks were really fresh. So I quickly scouted around, and about 50 meters up from where the road crossed this little river drainage line, there was a perfect tree. So I said to my trackers, quickly just go and hang this impala in the tree, just drag to the river and back, and quickly make us a blind. But we hadn't been out of water the whole day. So my client and I, we quickly drove to camp. We had a drink of water. I grabbed my shotgun. We went back to where these guys had built the blind. And all they'd done, they'd scraped out a little area about the size of a dining room table, and they hung up a piece of camouflage netting. And then that was it. The sun was already setting. So we quickly said to them, you push off. And I sat down with my client, and his rifle, we've been hunting with a buffalo. He's using a 380 grain rhino. I mean, that's a buffalo specific bullet. And this rifle was sighted in dead on at 100 yards. And we were sitting there on the ground, and within a couple of minutes, my client fell asleep. And he was exhausted. We've had two. So while he was sleeping, I opened the turret of his rifle, and I turned his scope down the appropriate number of clicks to make it dead on at 50 meters. And we hadn't been sitting there about 5 or 6 minutes when next minute this beautiful big male leopard was in the tree. So, and he was fast asleep. So I poked him in the leg and I said to him, listen, your leopard's in the tree. And I said, I've turned your scope down to, it's dead on at 50 meters now, so just shoot him through the shoulder blades. And he woke up, there was this leopard perfectly side on, took a shot, the leopard fell out of the tree, absolutely stone dead. And that whole hunt from start to finish was 20 minutes. And it's just one of those things that's what happens in hunting, buffalo hunting situations. I mean, leopard hunting situations. You just got to take the moment when it comes. That bullet worked perfectly, and it was just meant to be. You know, one of those situations where all the stars align and suddenly everything just falls into place.
Well, let's say we have a situation where you've got a guy that may be hunting in, say, a place like Namibia on maybe a combination leopard and plains game hunt. In a situation like that, I'm assuming it would be perfectly fine to use something like a 30-06 or a 7mm Remington Magnum on the leopard then too, right? The
7mm are, I think, the legal minimum, but a lot of guys shoot leopards with the 270, which is, a little bit smaller than a 7mm. I mean, it's .277s. But one of Africa's most famous professional hunters, a guy by the name of Harry Selby, you should be familiar with Harry Selby. Mm-hmm. He shot many leopards with a 243. He said that was perfect for leopards. Leopards are, any caliber that will reliably, easily kill a white-tailed deer will kill a leopard if you just put the bullet in the right spot.
Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about with regards to an ideal leopard rifle setup? I'm assuming maybe you'd go with something like a lower powered scope with a little bit bigger than normal objective lens then, right?
An illuminated reticle would make a huge difference, I hunted many leopards with a 1-to-4 power Leopard VX2. It wasn't a fancy scope at all. The light in Africa is really good, and I was never really disadvantaged by that. But those are the days before illuminated reticles, and so I've got a friend who's just going on a leopard hunt now in September, and he was looking for a scope for his 375. And we went shopping for scopes, and the sad thing is about it is that you couldn't. It's almost impossible to buy a new scope these days. But he got the Leopard HD 5, I think it is, 2-to-10 with the illuminated reticle, and a 42-inch diameter objective lens. And I actually bought one of those scopes myself. I've just been given a 375, and I reckon that would be the absolutely ideal scope for a leopard. Going from 2-to-10, where you've got your magnification, and you've got that range compensating reticle as well, which you probably won't use, but because you're going to sight your rifle in exactly for the shooting distance. But with that size of objective lens and the clarity of the new Leopard scopes and that fine duplex reticle with a little fire dot in the middle, I reckon that would be absolutely ideal. And I think that would increase your chance as well, because there have been some situations, especially if your leopard is not silhouetted and it's at very last light, that if you shine into the sky, you can see your reticle, but when you try and get your reticle onto the leopard into those dark shadows, you can't see your reticle, and then that's just a recipe for disaster if you take a shot like that.
I actually had a very similar incident that I had to deal with a few years ago when I was bear hunting. And just like you said, right, it's right at last light. You have a black reticle in your scope, and it is very hard to find it sometimes when you're looking at a black creature like that darn bear was. And everything worked out fine, but it was harder than would have been necessary had I had a scope with illuminated reticle. And it sounds like you're talking about the Leopold VX5 HD scope, which is a great scope, and I have one it's a little bit different from the one you're talking about. It doesn't have an illuminated reticle, but I do agree that one, say, like you described, with that 2-to-10 magnification on it with an illuminated reticle would just be a great all-around scope to use on hunting all sorts of stuff over there, to include leopard.
I totally agree with you. Wonderful scope. One topic we haven't covered is that the rifle that you use for initial shot at a leopard is not the rifle you use if you have ever, God forbid, have to follow a wounded leopard. And that was very much a topic of conversation when we were training professional hunters, because a wounded leopard will eventually charge you if you push it for long enough. And what do you use to defend yourself? And there were two schools of thought. Some of the old school guys said, well, you can use a shotgun and double Nord buck. And there are just as many guys that have being so armed that have been scratched, as that found out that was not an effective combination. So I never had to follow a wounded leopard, as I said, but my big game hunting rifle was a 505 Gibbs, and it's a bolt action. And I often thought, gee, would I use this if I had to follow a wounded leopard? And I'm a fairly accomplished clay pigeon shotter. So that maybe one thing I should mention, that when we were training guys to become professional hunters, and if they were going to hunt with the dangerous cats, and even with buffalo, we insisted that they learn how to shoot sporting clays really well, because there are a lot of similarities between shooting sporting clays really well and a dangerous game situation where the animal's either running towards you or running away from you. So basically you start with your firearm out the shoulder, and it's a moving shot, so you might have to have a little bit of forward allowance. And this is where gun fit is so absolutely important, that you point and shoot. Because when a leopard comes to you, you've got no time to aim. You point and shoot just like you shooting at a flushing quail. And some guys like shotguns. I've got a very good, successful PH friend of mine, Gavin Rourke, and he's a big bear of a guy. And he uses a 10 gauge side by side. Was his leopard medicine with 3-inch cartridges of nickel-plated double Nord buck. Myself, when I was the only time, if I have ever had to follow the leopard, I would use my Morocco 12 gauge over and under, my sporting clays gun. And in the bottom barrel, I would have probably put a Brenniker slug, and then in the top barrel, which I'll shoot bottom barrel first, top barrel next, I would probably put a healthy charge of copper-plated, even that buffered. I think they had some shotgun cartridge that had like a plastic buffer in it of copper-plated. But thank heavens I never had to use it. But I know quite a few guys, especially my friends that hunt with double rifles, and they would, if they had to follow wounded leopard, they just use their normal double. They just make sure they use 2 Woodley softs, because they all reckon that those Woodley soft point is the bullet to go for if you are going to have to shoot an inbound leopard. I suppose the original old Hornady before Hornady GGX, before it was bonded, would probably also make quite a good leopard bullet. Did that answer the question, John?
Oh, yes, definitely. You know, there was a video I saw several years ago of a wounded leopard, charging some guys. And I think it was in Zimbabwe, several years ago. And if memory serves me right, it was 3, maybe 4 PHs in there with the client. Client shot this leopard the previous evening, wounded it, and then they're all following it up together the next morning.
PH that's wearing a shirt with no sleeves.
Yeah, that's the one.
And he screams like a girl.
Yep, he does.
I know all those guys, so they're just a comedy of errors, for heaven's sake.
I was just absolutely amazed at how well hidden that leopard was, right? You watch the video and then rewind it right back before the leopard charges out of the brush. And even though I knew exactly where the leopard was, I couldn't see it until it moved there. And it just moved so darn fast. And things went to pieces so quickly. I guess they're really lucky it didn't turn out any worse than it already did, which was bad enough.
And if you look carefully at that video footage, that leopard is running on 3 legs. His left front shoulder is broken. That was a 3-legged leopard. You imagine what a 4-legged leopard can do. They are so fast. And what makes a leopard so dangerous is that a leopard will charge you. He does not announce his intention. If you're following a wounded lion, a lion will always growl or warn you that he's coming. And you'll see his tail flicker 3 or 4 times. The leopard comes silently. And they say like a flying buzzsaw. And if you not competent with your rifle and you cannot shoot really well, the chances of stopping that are not good.
So as we wrap up today, is there a single parting piece of guidance that you would give to someone that was interested in going leopard hunting for themselves?
Yeah, just do your homework and go and enjoy the experience. Because leopard hunting is unique, and as I tried to explain, that blind sitting and it's a totally different hunt. I mean, a leopard hunt from a buffalo hunt could be a chalk and cheese. They are just so different, but it's such unique, and that's and get involved with all the little tricks of the trade and the nuances and all the little things that go in to make a leopard hunt successful. You know, I really enjoyed it when my clients would try and help me find a blind site and trying to say, what about this tree? What about here? And they got involved in the hunt, and that made it a fantastic experience because you could just see that they were actually enthralled by the whole experience. And it's so different. I mean, a leopard hunt is so different from anything else that if you love Africa and you love it, and that leopard trophy is just a magnificent trophy. And there are a lot more leopards in Africa than we realize because we just don't see these things, but we see their signs. So I would encourage you, if you any interest in hunting a leopard, go for it, because you will be absolutely amazed at what a rewarding experience and a unique experience it can be.
Well, I definitely agree, and that is hopefully something I will get to experience for myself one day. Kevin, it is a pleasure having you on the show as always. Thanks a lot for joining us. Have a great day.
My pleasure, John, and I hope your listeners find this interesting.
If you enjoyed this video, then please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel right now. Just click the red subscribe button below to make sure you don't miss out on any of my new videos about hunting gear reviews, cartridge comparisons, and more. And to pick up one of Kevin's books, go to thebiggamehuntingblog.com/Kevin. Are you interested in going leopard hunting yourself? Or even if you don't want to go or can't afford to hunt leopard, maybe you want to go to Africa to hunt plains game or something else? Well, if you want to do that, in addition to picking up Kevin Robertson's books, you should also click the link in the description below or go to huntingguns101.com and sign up to get a free ebook I have written on the best hunting calibers, to include some that will work great on leopard, as well as plains game and even Cape buffalo in Africa. Now I'm going to turn it over to you. Have you hunted leopard before? If so, where? How did you do it? How did the hunt go? What rifle, cartridge, and bullet did you use? Let me know by leaving a comment on this video right now. Thank you for watching. Have a great day and good hunting.